The opinions expressed are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the official positions of the sponsors, advertisers, or presenters. Advertising does not imply endorsement by the sponsors and presenters.
Hey guys, and welcome back to the Lighting Controls Podcast. We have another fantastic episode for you today with a guest who's been on the show previously, but in a different capacity, but we'll let him fill you in on that. Before we jump into everything, let me take a minute to remind everyone today's episode is presented by the LCA, the Lighting Controls Association, and Light Fair. We look forward to seeing you guys there in just a few short months.
And also, it's financially supported by the National Association of Innovative Lighting Distributors, or NAILD. Check out our website, lightingcontrolspodcast.com. Got a lot of information, but also there's information about the certification. You should check it out, the NAILD Lighting Specialist in Controls, LSC. There are 3 tracks, definitely worth checking out if you want to take the next step when it comes to lighting controls knowledge and education. Also, huge shout out to our sponsor for this episode. We could not do this without your support. MW Connect is the sponsor for this episode. Check them out, mwconnect.us. They're an industry leader, award-winning Bluetooth mesh lighting control solution. They've been in the business for over 40 years now. We have a great episode interviewing the owner of the company, as well as just getting into the nitty-gritty of how MW Connect evolved from ballasts to lighting control solutions, and they really want to be involved in your next lighting controls project. So check them out, mwconnect.us. But until then, let's get into the conversation. So today we have Bryan coming back. Bryan, for those who have not seen your episode before, do you mind just giving us a quick breakdown on who you are and what you do?
Sure. I am the lead technical control specialist for Apex Lighting Solutions now. I was formerly a system integrator for Barbizon. It's great
Awesome.
to be back.
Yeah, thanks for coming back. I mean, it's always one of those things where you're like, yeah, it would be awesome to continue this conversation. Let's get them back on here. And then eventually the roster, the Rolodex of people, it comes up and it's like, yep, okay, great. We're getting back into this conversation. But what's fun here is the fact that you've actually changed jobs. And so you've gone from dealer integrator to sales rep. And so, I think one of the things clarifying here is worth getting into for people who might not understand the nuanced difference. What's the difference between a dealer and a distributor, first of all?
Yeah. So with a dealer, I was really coming and helping out the electrical contractor with subs and trying to figure out how to put multiple manufacturers together for one cohesive project. As a dealer, I'm working more with the architect. I'm working more with specifiers to really connect the wires together and saying, this is how we can do it. And sometimes that's in-house, and sometimes that's also judging and saying, this is going to be really complicated, and you need to start having a conversation with a system integrator if you're not having one already. And so it puts me in a really interesting position, knowing what I know and doing what I do and having the relationships that I have, because it helps make the project go smoother by really putting up those flags in terms of where's your sequence of operations, where's your DMX addressing, where do you want this to go, what do you want the lights to do after 10 p.m., what are we aiming for? Or do you want lead points? How many lead points do you need? Are we aiming for platinum? Are we aiming for bronze? You might be able to not need a whole lot on our side if you're just aiming for bronze, but I need to know more about your system. So it really puts me at a place where, as a distributor, there's frustrations there of being so far downstream sometimes, and really relying on your relationships to say, what do you with your electrical engineers, with your electrical contractors, like, what do you need, what do you want, and maybe even getting a request for quote, and having 3 days, 4 days to turn it around, and it's like, why are you dropping this on my lap, man? Like, or and it's and it's frustrating when it's January and you're getting these documents and you're seeing revisions and addendums printed out in October, and you're like, where where was the conversation about how complicated this was going to be? So,
Right.
yeah, in ways of being full Hamilton, it's like it puts me in the room where it happens a little more to be where I am, and at least have the wherewithal of saying, yeah, I can take care of this all in house, or this is going to be complicated and this is going to take multiple weeks, and we need to understand, and everyone on the design team needs to understand how complicated this is going to be. So let's get the right people in the room now and early.
Yeah, I mean, and so that kind of transition, it's one of the things that we talk about a lot here is getting the right people in early and in the meetings at the beginning of a project. So even if it's just, being a fly on the wall, you might not engage that much, but you can at least kind of step in and say, whoa, that's really complicated. Let's talk about that a little bit more than, it being like, yeah, we're going to do this and, we'll figure it out later. And then from your perspective as a dealer, that was usually later was after the drawings were issued, which is way too late.
Absolutely. Yeah. I don't deal with it later. Very good, in a very positive manner.
Sure.
I've been in, for me, my background, for those that may not know, theatrically trained, been in this industry now for 20 some odd years. And one of the reasons why I took the role as well was because I would be put in a leadership position. And so, I'm now really asking the questions that were asked of me of how do we go to market and how do we help people get out of their own way. There's been some changes and some adjustments with IALD saying that lighting designers can start really having their own controls teams, which is great. And also they don't necessarily, or at least my knee-jerk reaction is they don't know what sort of hurt they're getting themselves into, because I've worked nationwide with offices that have controls teams, air quotes, and they do not specify what they need to specify and make clear what they need to make clear on their drawings, and just kind of throw it up and say, well, this is what we're trying to do. And it's like, man, you got 18 T-splices on your DMX line. What do you know about DMX? Like, maybe you should be. Yeah. And so there are times when I'm like, okay, controls team, pat on the head. You did a good job. Now let the professionals do work.
All right, so let's dive into that a little bit, because we've had a lot of conversations with people about firms that do have controls teams that maybe take it a little bit more seriously, or have brought somebody in who is more like you, that who's is trained to actually do controls and is now part of that design team. So let's how do you sort of, when you meet with one of these teams, how do you kind of, I mean, it's usually pretty easy, but how do you flush out if the people on that team are actual, people who actually understand controls, truly understand controls, are going to be able to put together a system, and then how you can assist them as needed, because we are starting to see more of that. And then there are still the firms who want nothing to do with controls at all.
Absolutely. I mean, it's a good revenue stream of revenue for a lighting controls, or at least a lighting design office, to really say, like, we're going to take this, we're going to take these packages, we're going to put these extra hours in, right? I have no problem with that. It's the copy and paste of a previous spec that worked well, that has nothing to do with the project at hand, or it's a 20-year-old spec, or it's a 10-year-old spec, and being like, well, everything's changed from what you're doing here. It's just, this is the same old, that's the problem that I have, is when it's a copy and paste slap together on 104, 105, whatever. And you're just like, all right, cool. It's completely wrong. And the problem is that it's, using product that can't even do the goals that you're trying to accomplish, or it does it in such a clunky way that you should have just gone very high level and be like, I need a lighting control processor. I want a touchscreen next to it. I need to have, DMX, or I need to have 0 to 10. Maybe I'm being ambitious and I want to do Dolly, but I just want to just a general one line of that high level that people can bid for. is way better than having, a specific name and a specific product and then just say, and equal, right? Those are the things of just like, like you didn't even use that product, right? So let me educate you on how this works and how the game of telephone works, because you're responsible for calling out what you want to do and what you intend to do. And this side of the river, this side needs to know more than just lumen output and how you're going to want to see the space and your levels of light. I want to respect that, but I also want to get it to a place that isn't going to be a month down the road and we're still having problems, right? And we're not able to meet your expectations because nobody quoted enough gear on the job for what we needed to do.
And so with these projects, I mean, let's say, for instance, you weren't brought onto the project at the beginning and you are just handed these drawings at, 0 hour. We need a quote ASAP. What do you do in those situations?
You jump, baby. You jump. I mean, we have a quotes team who really handles those, not really involved from the very beginning projects, and it's just like, get me a number. You get those directives from the distributor, from the ECs. I have this project, get me a number. And they're really hard. But most of my time is spent working on exactly those things where the quotes team goes, I don't know how to do this because this isn't completely straightforward, or cold calls from anyone and that is in with the line of the whole process, from lighting designer who says, manufacturer and agent switch this stuff out to Dolly. All we have is 0 to 10. What do we need? To, the EC going, I didn't bid for this stuff. There's no controls on this. I didn't know that there was existing DMX on the system. To, we have 3 different DMX processors. None of them talk to each other. And we want a system that is cohesive. And the minutia and the gambit all in there. And so, it's hard. It's the first time around. Usually when you get to a place where the PO is cut and the dust is settled, you can have a conversation of, so let's talk about what just happened. And how can we make your life easier? Yeah.
Before we get into that, you use the term PO, which stands for purchase order. Do you mind just explaining what that is to people who might be unfamiliar with that term?
Right. So we're issuing out quotes for, this is how much we anticipate the hard goods to cost, plus any sort of commissioning that we see and anticipate on this job. So then that goes to the distributor and go through chains, because the EC is the one that's actually doing the purchasing. I remember in previous lives, I was working for a manufacturer, and the executives were like, who's our customer? And everyone in that room was like, if you don't know that our customer depends on who we're talking to, we have problems. But the truth is that the actual purchaser is the electrical contractor who's doing the installation, who's getting their okays from the client, right? And so that purchase order, is going through chains and is basically the contract and saying, we are going to purchase this gear at this price, and hopefully in 6 to 8 weeks it gets here.
Well, and that's a typical project format. I mean, sometimes you find the general contractor will actually purchase the equipment without including the EC at all, which can sometimes be a good thing or a bad thing. Or you'll see mixtures of stuff being purchased from different groups. So, but
You're
yeah,
right.
so
That's
under
typical
circumstances,
yeah, definitely. Then you can have crazy things like direct buys as well too. So it just depends on on the relationships and the contracts of the companies that you represent or that you're able to.
And what is a direct buy?
So a direct buy is basically, if you have a relationship with a manufacturer through your company and through terms and agreements, that you can bypass the distributor, you can bypass the electrical contractor, and the actual end user can purchase. And and so there's all sorts of caveats that go along with that in terms, but basically it is circumventing a couple of steps in order to reduce costs for someone.
Right. Well, and some companies out there do only function with direct
Yeah.
buy. So they do not
Right.
work with reps. They do not work with distribution. They only work with direct buy format, which, again, to your point, has pros and cons to it because cost is lower, but you have less of the safeguards and checks and balances to make sure that the system's complete. It's usually you have a pretty savvy end user who knows what they're doing buying that equipment, or at least has a team in-house that can handle that equipment without having to lean on distribution or sales reps for that kind of work. But anyway,
Totally.
so going back to your story about the post-mortem, once the dust settles after you get that purchase order brought to you and things are in production finally because you got an agreement. Yes, we're going to pay for what you told us you're going to build. So everything's built. So what do you do in that post-mortem?
It's less of a post-mortem and more of a lunch and learn.
Well, and that's another great term. Do you mind just defining that too? Because
Sure.
I don't know if everybody knows what a lunch and learn is.
Sure. So back in the day, you would have. I'll just say that because it's a matter of like the way things have shifted slightly, but because you would just have you would have an agent and they would do a show and tell at the office. And for an hour of somebody's time would be like, here's your beam spread, ooh here's your dimming capacity, ooh it's 0.1%, 10% dimming, but really you're getting 1%, but nobody's going to tell you that. And sorts of just general product show and tell, right? But a lunch and learn is a little bit more structured, and from my experience in the last, or at least in the pre-COVID world, it's really desirable for the specifiers to sit down, get your full attention, but also have something in their bellies as well to just, it's more of an educational element to it than product. I mean, obviously product, and I'm not going to short sell getting out there in front of people and showing product. But getting to go through and having them captive for an hour, a dedicated hour of this is what we do, why we do it, how we do it. These are the problems that we've seen and from just the industry trends in general, but also maybe from your office. And be like, this is how we could have helped you better, or this is how we got involved, but we got involved 3 steps down the line. And also calling out, those section 13s, those section 26s, those elements that really tripped us up, and 11s, obviously, of just like, this is where you copy, like, this is how we could tell you copied and pasted. And the problem is that this is where you actually hurt yourself in having product available to you. Or did you really need to have that high level lighting control processor on the job when the client could have really utilized something far simpler? Because by the time that the gear got on site, they wanted, the touchpads to be disabled during the day. Like they didn't want to worry about the touchpads, the keypads. They just wanted a touchscreen that lived in the electrical closet. And like they want to walk up to that. They didn't need to have anything networked or integrated or having, building management or backnet to that. Like they weren't really looking for any sort of automation or anything like that, but that's gear on top of gear on top of gear on top of gear. And that's what you called out in this copy and paste situation, or at least, how we interpret it as that. So if that's not what the client was really asking for, and there's all sorts of memes of this, right? And conversations of where, it's like all the owner really wanted was a treehouse with a rope swing, but what they got was a Lamborghini and a high-speed rail, right? And so, and it's like, those things don't even go with the thing. So, so it's just a matter of trying to say, look, what happened? Because this is all a game of telephone. But if people are saying, well, we wrote it in the documents, or it's in the specs, and it's going, this is what you drew, this is what you wrote.
Yeah.
there's a problem there, and we have to go by what is written, even if what is drawn is correct but incorrect, right?
Right.
And so, yeah, it can be a good sobering experience, especially when you're dealing with controls in today and where controls are going, to have places where, like in the form of lunch and learn, to be like, we're not angry at you. We just want you to know, like, you're responsible for passing this information along. We got parts and pieces over on the other side of the circle. And then we have to kind of fill in the gaps. And what happens is it adds cost to your intent. Mm-hmm. And so, or at least it usually does. I've rarely see instances where it's like they're asking for a network system and they end up getting a standalone without some sort of VE directive, right?
Yep.
So it's just a matter of trying to figure out where the game is played and getting to a satisfied result at the end of it. Because telephone, man, it's fun.
Yeah, it is. It's tough, right? Because that is probably the biggest. That's one of the things that we talk about a lot. Is that it's so hard. We always talk about trying to make sure you can get in front of the right people, and unfortunately, depending on your path right through, you don't always get in front of the owner. You don't get to have these questions, and then you spend so much time working on drawings with the information you have, and then it's always the 11th hour, and the specification is due, and that's when copy paste, and that's when you see these issues. And because the spec is Bible, that's the drawings get sort of pushed aside, right? And that's unfortunately that's how these things continue to happen. I do have a question for you though. You mentioned Dolly, and we've had a lot of conversations about Dolly on the show. Now that you're in the rep world, in covering Boston and New England, are you seeing more Dolly in the area? Is there sort of more Dolly projects coming? Are you working on specifying Dolly projects? What are you seeing?
It really depends on the scale of the job, because a Dolly controller and a DMX controller is like, your first address costs you $5,000, right? Your 32nd address costs you pennies, right? And so it's a matter of, if it's a school, for example, that, and it depends on the driver too, right? Because it's not every manufacturer is making and providing Dolly drivers. But if everything lines up and you're on this, we can do Dolly here, and let's do a Dolly loop in this room, do one Dolly loop in this room, in this room, in this room. It's great. Let's do that. But it's also about, well, what's been spec'd, and again, where am I fitting in that logic? Am I at an architect's office where I can talk about Dolly and I can say, we can do this, and it's going to be easier for a school to do this than it will be to do 0 to 10, just because of the amount of overhead that's going to be involved, and how things get bought and how things get marked up. But if it's we are reacting to a school spec that's already out there and going to bid, then it's we're bound by the 0 to 10 spec that it is. I have my own beef with Dolly, with Dolly 1, Dolly T8, Dolly 2, and sort of guys, you've made a USB A and a USB micro, macro, and a C problem all on your own. Congratulations. And shout out to the Dolly initiative. But I also love it because it's a matter of, well, I'm not afraid of it because I understand DMX and where it's coming from and the heart of it. It's just a matter of trying to get all these drivers and all these manufacturers to play well with each other. And it's like, oh yeah, we do. A lot of them go, well, we do T8 or we do Dolly 1, but we don't do Dolly 2, or we do Dolly 2, but we're not capable of doing Dolly broadcast. And it's like, well, broadcast is really, in a lot of instances, I find Dolly broadcast is easier to use and really what I need to do, as opposed to individually addressing product. And that's the other side of Dolly, is if I do broadcast.
Well, and before you get into that, can you just explain for people who might not be familiar with Dolly
Sure.
formats and programming language, what is Dolly
Yeah.
broadcast?
So Dolly broadcast is like everything in DMX is the address one, right? And it's just sending out general information about lights on, lights off. This zone is going to do this and this zone is going to do this, but it's all basically one big broadcast. There's no real addressing associated with it. It's just room.
Right.
And I prefer it, and this is probably going to blow somebody else's heads away, but I prefer it because I think I've been in this. One of my first roles was tech support, and one of my first roles was application engineering. And what I think about is what a project's going to look like in 5 years. What's the project going to look like in 7 years?
Yep.
Somebody throws up a Dolly driver and it doesn't work. And they have no, and that building manager, her staff have no idea why it's not working. Boop, boop, boop. Somebody gets a call and says it's not working. And then they go, oh, by the way, that fixture that you got, now you need to spend another, 25, $2,000. You need to get a technician out there to actually address the fixture and to program it into the space that you have. And it's like, well, it was a dead driver. Right. And so from their logic, they're like, why do I need to spend, I just replaced this thing, and whatever and stuff. I've just spent X amount of dollars for this fixture. Now I need to spend extra overhead on something that's been working. In worst case scenario, it's like 15 years old. Right. And then somebody goes, I have no way to plug into this thing because the software is so old that it's not compatible with my computer anymore. So, biggest and worst case scenario is now you got to rip out the entire lighting controls package because you changed out one fixture or it died on you. Right. And so Dolly Broadcast at least gives you those sorts of solutions and saying everything is a singular address and we can do it. But not a lot of people are putting it in their specs as to whether or not it's possible with their controls product. Sure. So it's hard to say, okay, so do I need to address everything or do I not have to address everything? And then it's a matter of, well, what does the actual commissioning agent want to do or to get the job done? But sometimes you're limited to what the technology and what the actual software will do.
No, but I think that's a good distinction. And I think, as your point is valid when it comes to the Dolly types and the USB types, because a lot of people do kind of get lost and are like, I don't understand, like, what's the difference between this one and this one, other than the fact that they're not compatible. But I mean, I think that is sort of part of what the Dolly Alliance is trying to do with Dolly 2 is basically say, okay, forget all the stuff in the past. We're kind of turning a new page. Dolly 2 standard means that you have to have X, Y, and Z. And so that kind of antiquation is going away. But to your point, there's still a lot of groups right now that are still issuing drivers that are Dolly 1 or Dolly T8 or not necessarily 2 compliant. And so as a result, we still are kind of in that weird intermediary space. And so having that kind of foresight to plan and say, okay, 20 years down the road when this fixture dies, what's it going to take to program the new fixture is certainly worth considering. And I think that's something that a lot of designers don't necessarily think about when it comes to the longevity of their fixtures, especially because, well, with 0 to 10, you don't need to reprogram the fixtures. You just replace them. Whereas with Dolly, you absolutely have to reprogram.
Exactly. So that was going to be my other point, right? Is 0 to 10 fixture fails, you get the fixture, you get something that fits into that hole, whatever, depending on the timeline. But then you just connect it to the wires and it works, right? And so it depends on your client, depends on the scale of the project. But yeah, there are all sorts of problems. And so I just, I try to think about what the end user is doing and anticipating, especially high turnover, for building managers. And that's, and, it's like, every 2-3 years, I seem whatever role I'm in, I'm getting some sort of call from somebody like, my people don't know how to use the touchscreen or use this thing. Like, how can we, or we want to make changes to it. What do we need to do? And it's like, okay, well, we'll get out there and we'll train you. But yeah, it's, there's, it's a challenge when, been like, yeah, everybody wants to, move up or finds another thing to do. And, so you have to think about not just warranties of product, but you have to think about the end user and their experience. And because the worst case scenario is a system nobody uses because they don't understand it.
Right. And so that's something that we mention a lot, but we don't necessarily jump into explaining what that's like. But the end user training, as a sales rep, you are kind of on the hook for making sure that the end users are trained. And so what does that normally look like from where you're standing from your company?
Yeah. In the past, my experiences have been, all right, call up all your guys and we'll go through the thing. And then everybody goes up there and pats each other on the back and makes some sort of crude joke about something that happened over the weekend. And then they go, okay, how does this work? And you go, all right, here's the controller. Here's your pages. This is the button that you use to change the pages. Here you go. And boop, boop, boop. Now the lights are red. Boop. Now the lights are green. And then they go, that's it. That's all I want to know. Cool. Great. I just pushed the button that says green when I need to push green. All right, great. And then, 6 of them will go away. Maybe one of them has another question of like, so, what else is going on back here? And be like, okay, so here's how the wires are working, right? And then you get excited because you're like, okay, I have a captive audience for whatever. And then it's like, hey, and then you get somebody to leave at the room, be like, hey, Joey, come here, and then they leave. And so it's like, okay, well, my drawings, I guess, are on this USB stick that I'm just going to leave here because you've all left.
Right.
And put my card in the door, and I guess I'll be talking to you in 6 months when you don't know what's going on. Because everybody starts with the ideal of like, we want to be able to change our own settings or change our own timelines, or maybe we have another idea that we wanted to do, and we also want to know how to interface this, and how do we put some sort of Outlook scheduling on here? Everybody kind of starts at that place, and you're like, okay, so what I need is like a full day of your time. And they're like, whoa, full day of my time? Like, yeah, man. Like, because if you want to know how this software works, I need at least 3 hours. And really, then I'm going to have like a half an hour to an hour of question and answers all throughout this presentation, how to do it. Then we need to actually do it, because I can't just show you how to do this and then go, well, that's how Microsoft Office works, guys. So have fun, without any sort of like, we're gonna have to type out a couple documents here for you to understand how to adjust the margins, right? And taking people offline for a full day is a big ask, right? And so usually, in my experience, it's been just distilled to like an hour or half an hour of their time at best, and been like, how do the lights turn on? Okay, they automatically turn off. Cool, great, awesome. Does it reset in the morning? What's it do? In this case, yes, you've asked for it to go back to white at 9 o'clock in the morning, and it will do that. I'm like, okay, cool. Or it's no, you press the blue button. It's going to live at blue until you come back up here and you press white. And it's 50-50. Sometimes like, oh, I don't know if I want that. I think I want it to reset all the time. And it's like, okay, come, do.
Right.
Right. Upload.
Well, and out of curiosity, from your perspective, where do you think the disconnect is? Because obviously there's this, ideal expectation that the training, as a specifier, I would say, 8 hours of training or something like that, if it's a really intense training project. But then the reality is that the end users don't really care, or at least the people you have at these training sessions don't really care. And so it's like, what happened here? Why do we have this expectation, but the reality is so different?
That's a great question. I think I'm going to answer it in as many ways as possible. One, time is money.
Sure.
And so knowing that a building manager is going to lose their entire facilities people for one manufacturer training, and who knows how many manufacturers they've already had to come in and do training.
Right.
and how many more that they are going to need. Like, because I can imagine a building's got to need training on HVAC, on emergency, on lighting controls, on how to clean the carpets, to like, and it's just a matter of like every product in that building, I imagine would need some sort of training. And it's like, I can't, and it's a matter of, yeah, I still have stuff that breaks every day. I still need to get repairs done. Like I still have, 17 floors to worry about, and to take my entire facilities people offline for a day. That's big. That's big. Right. And, uh, and then it's, part of it is interest, right? It's like, well, if the owner's not going to be there. And it's like, if they really want to know, then, or if they really want to know how to adjust the overall programming, then it's something that I've come to like, well, we didn't really factor in a half day of training. And so that's going to be additional to what we've already put in, because we've anticipated the 30-minute training.
Right.
And so and then it becomes, well, are we really going to use it? Hemming Han, we've already spent millions and billions of dollars on this building. How many times do we really see this working? Or do we just give people a list of the things that we want? And then just say it's all there, and it's all on the touchscreen or the web portal or whatever you're going to use to do it. And again, maybe in 2 years, nobody is actually, going to do it, or the people who remembered it was there have left already. So, it's a big challenge, but yeah, it's usually like the facility guys just want to know, like, how do I know if it's broken?
Yeah.
Right. Like, how's it going to work every day? And then how's it going to break, and who do I contact? And so the overall interest of how the beeps and boops work it's not within their interest, and it's not what they get paid for.
Right.
Right.
Yeah. Far too often, right? You run into that where it is exactly that. I push this button and the lights turn on. Great. That's all I need. And then you hear from them a month or two later when someone complained that the lights in their office went off, and they had to sit there and do one of these, and they had to wave around to the sensor to get it to turn on. And you get the call back to make some adjustments because they're not going to learn the software. No one there wants to learn the software, or it wasn't part of their scope to get trained on the software. So you run into that, and then that buys you another 6 months before you hear from them again. And then it's usually another year or two. And at that point, the staff's all turned over and there's no one there. But how many times, Bryan, did you do training to a camera because no one showed up and the GC just sat there with his camera or phone and videotaped you doing a training that no one ever watched?
Yep. And how many times was after the end of that training would they say, "Can I get a printout of this presentation? Thank you." And just an outline prior to the training, and be like, "This are all the things that I'm going to cover. Is this too much? Is this too little?" And probably usually silence. I think 9 out of 10 times I got silence, but yeah, it's like, okay, well, here's the PDF printout of my time. Thanks for not being here. Cool. Yeah. Let me know if you have any problems. Shrug. Right. But yeah, there's a lot of that of you set the time, you confirm that people are, hey, I'm going to be there I'm taking 4 hours of my day to go, from home to site, and to do this presentation. You guys going to be there? Or if I don't do that, right? If I don't do that, everyone forgets. And then I'm scrounging around to try and be like, hey, I'm on site. I'm ready for the meeting that we planned 2 weeks ago. Can you get your guys to wherever and tell me where we're meeting? Because I don't know where we're meeting. And I think you need to find your guys. And then an hour later, you're still wandering around. Be like, oh, is room 101 open? Okay, let's go. Let's go. Oh, no, that's going to be occupied in 15 minutes. All right, I guess we're going to 108. All right, let's go. So, yeah, it's, man, there's definitely 18 gray hairs in my head, just the stress of trying to figure out, like, when is this meeting actually going to happen?
Well, we're almost out of time here, but I want to summarize this because I think this is, I know time flies so quickly, but I think this is a really interesting point that we kind of got to here, which from beginning to end, when it comes to lighting controls, the majority of projects just do not have the conversations, the coordination, or any real substantial thought put to it. And there are these kind of checks and safeguards that we have in place, but they're not really well enforced either. So, the idea of training alone should be at least some kind of safeguard to make sure that the people who are using the equipment understand the basics of it. But for the majority of the time, they're not even paying attention or even present for that training. And rewinding all the way to the beginning of the project, it may be the same kind of mentality of just like, we'll deal with it later, or, we don't need to worry about that right now. And so it's kind of like there's this tiny window in the middle of a project that everything happens to make sure that it goes well. And oftentimes
Yep.
it's the rep that makes sure that they get that window and they're working as hard as they can to make sure, because like you said, the documents may just be copy pasted from one project to the next and not even applicable. The integrator may not have heard about this project until the last minute, and therefore they don't know what's going on with it. You might have to call a million people and figure out like what is going on with this project. Like, am I reading this correctly, or did you literally just copy paste from the past projects? And so as a result, this thin slice of time is so critical to making sure that this project goes well, that if it's skipped over, it could go so poorly. And we've seen that happen again and again. And it's partly why we have these really bad, hyper media focused experiences with lighting controls, like schools with their lights not turning off, or something critical in somebody's infrastructure that just fails and it's lighting specific. I mean, we see that again and again. It's oftentimes you can point to the process and say, you skipped a step, and that step was so critical to the success of this project that you really bungled this so hard. And now the cost of the project shoots up. But,
Yeah.
I think this is part of why the rep is so critical to the success of a project, because oftentimes you can kind of sneak in the beginning and get a prediction of when that window is going to happen. And when that window happens, you jump in, do your job. And then after that, you're just kind of like going through the motions almost. Like, it's just sort of like, yeah, we have to do this, but nobody's going to care.
Absolutely. Sometimes you're just trying to stay on target, and you get a TIE fighter to blow you up because your shields are double front. And sometimes you're aiming for that exhaust port, and maybe you get it. But but it's I mean, even as team lead on the control side, it is a real challenge, because at the end of the day, I'm just the controls guy, right? Even right within the industry, in any event that I go to, I know I have the scarlet letter put to me of like, oh, he's the control guy. And I have plenty of people on my team and in my office who are like, he's my control guy. He's going to get me through this. I just need to get him the documents as quickly as possible. I don't know controls. I don't want to know controls. Pass it on and we'll figure this out and it'll be great. And then I have other folks that like just don't even get to that even level of panic. And then I reach out to them and I'm like, I need to have a conversation with these people because these are the problems that I'm seeing. And I can put out an RFI and we can be at the same place that we're going to be in a month when I get responses back, or like we have the connections and we can actually just get these people on the horn and let's just have a conversation on Friday about it. And you can easily get into a wall of like, well, you're my controls guy. Like, I'll deal with them. Just give me the list of questions that you want. And be like, do you really want me to just give you a list of questions? Because you're going to look at them cross-eyed. I'm just saying, as just the controls guy, let's really have a conversation about how to thread this needle and get the project down to the finish line here and move on to the next one. Yeah.
It is so tough to get to that point, right? To just get in front of the right people, get the project moving forward, get to the finish line to you sell the job. So
Yeah.
it is tough. Bryan, thank you so much for your time today. Even if you did join the dark side and go to a rep agency, okay, we still like you.
I don't
But
think
no,
reps
really,
are the dark side.
that's because you
Thanks
were
for
one.
liking me.
That's
Yeah.
No,
Right, fair
really,
enough.
thank you so much. It's been a fantastic conversation. Really appreciate your time. It's valuable insight. Being able to talk to someone who's been sort of in multiple sides of it. You've been on the back side, you've been on the front side, and just you really get to see everything that happens. And like you said, now you're in a position where you get to be in the room where it happens, and you get to help
Yeah.
fix these problems up front. So it's fantastic, man. Really appreciate your time. I will close this out and remind everyone that today's episode is presented by the LCA, the Lighting Controls Association, and Light Fair. May is just a short way away, so make sure to get your tickets.
And it's financially supported by the National Association of Innovative Lighting Distributors, or NAILD. Check out our website, lightingcontrolspodcast.com. Got a lot of information, but especially information on the certification, the NAILD LSC Lighting Specialist in Controls. 3 tracks: design, distribution, and installation. You can't take all 3. So if you want to sign up, pick one. But they're all going to be really critical to job functionality. So really check it out if you want to step up your lighting controls knowledge and experience. But also, huge shout out to our sponsor, MW Connect, for this episode. We really could not do this without their support. And I highly recommend you check them out if you are unfamiliar with them. They used to be McWong. They're now MW Connect. And they really do want to make sure that the projects are done correctly, done well. They have reps in territories across the US ready to help you out, but they also have a lot of staff in-house in the US as well, ready to stand by and assist you on any projects. I once went out to their site actually this past year, and it's really cool to see the location in Sacramento and to kind of hear straight from the horse's mouth about information. But they really are an industry leading lighting controls platform, especially as it comes to Bluetooth mesh. So I highly recommend you check out mwconnect.us. That's their website. They really are worth your time if you're unfamiliar with them. So thank you so much for joining us. And Bryan, thank you. This was an awesome conversation.